Jason, we can't hear.
To it is not my responsibility. So I have the time to invite today our partnerships, Professor Muso from the business school to come and give you a business school welcome. As we're going to the business school, and I'll see what the other plans that I need is. Okay. Thank you very much, Lawrence. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Best Business School. And my name is Bruce Soko. I'm a professor here at Best Business School in International Business and Strategy. I'm also a Director of Development and Partnerships. I would like to extend a very, very welcome, firstly, to our keynote speakers, Professor Tunima Gonzela, Director of the Center for Social Justice at the University of Stellenbosch, who joins us online. Good afternoon, Professor. And then also Dr. Alice Mugwe. I saw her earlier. Welcome, Dr. Mugwe, who is the Director of the Botswana Center for Human Rights and President of the International Federation of Parliament. We also welcome Dr. Osama Moro from the Mandela Institute for Development Studies and Mines, who provide the opening address. Welcome, sir. Thank you. To our panelists, I will thank you for your time and look forward to hearing your insights. Professor Cheryl Hendricks from the Institute of Justice and Reconciliation. I gather that she's joining us online. Dr. Catherine Namakuma from Mines, representing the African Philanthropy Network. Professor Jacob Martin, our West Business School colleague from KEPSI. Mr. Kamala Dixon from the Southern African Youth Forum. African Day is celebrated every year, every 20, marking the foundation in 1963 of the Organization of African Unity, which later became the African Union. It is a day to celebrate African unity, the successes in the fight against colonialism and apartheid, and the progress Africa has made, while also acknowledging the ongoing challenges. The AU has long fought for justice for the people of Africa and has designated 2025 as the year of justice for Africans and people of African descent through reparations. Today, we'll be looking at how far we have come as a Pan-African people in addressing historical injustice and in our fight for human rights in Africa. As we look ahead to the birth of a new Africa, one built on hope, solidarity, and sustainable growth. The G20 Summit, to be held in Johannesburg later this year in the city, will revolve around the key themes of solidarity, equality, and sustainability. And also, in keeping with both the AU and G20's focal points for 2025, we are based today's commemoration on the theme Justice, Solidarity, Sustainability for Africa, Pathways of Hope and Regeneration for One Africa. 2025 will go down as a watershed year for Africa and South Africa as we seek to redefine our identities against a backdrop of major geopolitical threats. It is time for Africa to assert itself, to show its resilience and its solidarity in our fight for economic and social transformation. With periods of uncertainty threatening our world, it is time for Africans to stand strong and in unity. Thank you to my former colleague, Dr. Kira Iwe Nafosi, who joined us online from the United States for driving today's event, which is also a celebration of the great partnerships West Business School and Pepsi enjoy with Mines, SIOF, the APN, and the IJR. We're deeply committed to strengthening these partnerships and look forward to many future collaborations. Thank you.
So thank you so much for taking the access and thank you for setting the scene perhaps for what is next to come for the rest of the afternoon. Because I'm not only going to commence this time, we're people of sound, we're people of movement. If there's anything that we don't know is sound and movement at the very least. So we will see for also actually studying the world and the world of music. So I will thank people as we come and give us just one piece as we start off. This is the details of some of you. And you just think of this now with this.
Thank you so much, Lawrence, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Clara Gazi. I'm not going to use the mic when I'm singing, but I just want to say a few things. I don't have a phone, but just to keep us going to what I'm going to be doing just now. Folklore. This is according to AI. Professors here do allow us to use AI sometimes. They say let's not abuse it. It's the collection of traditional beliefs, stories, customs, and other cultural expressions shared by a particular group of people, passed down orally through practice over generations. So in Africa, that's how we get to learn what the things that happened before. It encompasses a wide range of cultural expressions, including myths, legends, fairy tales, proverbs, songs, dances, and rituals. And then the type of song that I'm going to be doing this afternoon is this afternoon. And I will invite everyone who knows the song to join me. And Sahara actually recorded the song that is from back home. She made a song that we sing back home, to be more known. From the Xhosa culture, it refers to a traditional type of singing and dancing, often used in healing rituals and celebrations. As we are celebrating Africa Day today, we're gonna it involves a rhythmic clapping and vocalization, accompanied by other movements like stomping, shaking the shoulders. So as I'm gonna ask you to clap with me. The song and the sound of the song will direct you. So I think this will be a bit too loud for the song. My selector.
Clarity in your sense of sound was actually good. So I'm glad I'm glad you pressed thank you so much, Kawakazi, for that and just giving the room. We appreciate it. But sure, allow me this time to ask this time as senior professor Dr. Lomokosi from the Chatham University and also the African Level Lecturer here at Western School to just set the scene as a thing overview, just give us an overview of why we're meeting in the theme for this year for this African communications. And so please be kind to do the work with university and if you can look especially in regards to the markets. So how are you going to invest the splash target that we'll see it in the US recently. Continue with that.
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me. Thank you.
Well,
Yes,
thank
thank
you.
you for that welcome and Kawe for the beautiful song. Just a request on behalf of everyone online, we are struggling to hear in the room, so please use the mics and maybe some assistance for clarity. So the audio is not very clear. So a warm welcome and heartfelt greetings to everybody online and in the room. As mentioned, my name is Giradilo Mohozi. I'm joining you from Pittsburgh in the United States today. So a very true testament that you can take an African out of Africa, but you can never take Africa out of an African. So we are celebrating Africa Day together today. We've prepared a very exciting lineup of speakers for you from various parts of the continent. The theme is justice, solidarity, sustainability for Africa, pathways of hope and regeneration for one Africa. The themes are quite relevant and pertinent to the times that we're living in today, because justice is the foundation for peace and reconciliation. Solidarity ensures that no community or country is left behind, and equality paves the way for sustainable growth. So our speakers are going to highlight how all of these pillars are essential for growth and prosperity of our continent. As mentioned, we have speakers that are representing our partners and hosts for this event from the Wits Business School, from Southern African Youth Forum, from the African Philanthropy Network, Institute for Justice and Reconciliation, the Mandela Institute for Development Studies, and the Center for African Philanthropy and Social Investment. So we will have a keynote and we'll also have a panel discussion to unpack these themes. The keynote is by Prof. Tuli Madonsela, who will be joining us online, Dr. Alice Mohwe, who is there with you in person. Our panelists, we have Prof. Cheryl Hendricks from the Institute for Justice and Reconciliation. We have Dr. Catherine Namakula, who's here online, and she will be representing Minds. We have Bonyue Ndondo from Hlanganisa, but she's representing APN for us today. We have Kamala Dixon from SIOF, who's representing the voices of the young people of our continent. We have Prof. Jacob Marty, who is there with you in the room representing CAPSI. We really encourage all of you to participate and enjoy this conversation. So please send your questions in the chat for those of you online, and in the room, please prepare your questions and comments. We are going to have a provision for that in the program. So welcome, enjoy. Thank you very much. Asante sana.
Thank you so much for those remarks. I'm told the room is enough. You can hear me in every corner of the room, so I should not worry. The actual fact, the mic is probably distorting the sound. So thank you so much for those opening remarks. Much appreciated. Ladies and gentlemen, as we start, just to also appreciate some of the key partners that are here. While Wits Business School and CAPSI are physically hosting this great event. One of our key partners in this whole event is IJR, which we want to appreciate. APN, African Philanthropy Network, great appreciation for you. SIOF, who are also one of our key organizers, and of course, Wits Business School CAPSI. But I want to especially highlight at this moment in time Minds, who are also key in that's a great event. And in acknowledging them, please allow me to invite Dr. Nkosana to come and also give us some opening remarks, even as one of our key partners in this great initiative. Let's give him a hand.
Hello. And wherever you are listening from, and I know just what about the mic, but not fantastic. You know, it usually happens when preparing to make comments. The preparation is very challenging. And in this case, it was not an exception. I found myself struggling. How do I actually tee up the conversation that we should have? And one of the things that occurred to me was that we risk always focusing too much on form rather than substance. So I thought to myself, a small survey, and I asked 3 people what Africa Day was all about. And then none of them knew what Africa, and these are Africans. They knew what Africa Day was all about. The only excuse that I could possibly come up with is that their age, they are young people. But I think therein lies a possible problem that we have as a continent. If our young people do not know our history, and they do not know where our institutions that are African are coming from, how are they going to build and sustain? They do not context. They do not know, which means we are failing them. We are not teaching them. But Professor Soko did me a favor by telling me, at least the people sitting in this room, what this day is all about. Comes from 1963, the formation of the AU, OAU, and all of that. But if I ask you what the history was that led to this day that we're commemorating was all about, what that the aspirations that that event teed up for us in terms of implementation, and whether actually we are living up to delivering on those aspirations, I think we've struggled. So I'm hoping that as we engage today, we go back to basics. Let's try and help each other to understand what a commemoration is all about. Why are we having this day? Where does it come from? What had happened before to justify the formation of the OAU? And at that point, one of the things that they talked about was the issue of unity, solidarity. Are we actually living up to those aspirations as a continent? All of us, don't point the finger at anybody. I asked myself, who played my role in making these aspirations come to be realized? And I think if we focus too much on just having a good time, meet every year, and So celebrate this day, but we don't keep asking ourselves the history, the context, the aspirations, and challenging ourselves to deliver on those aspirations. Then we're wasting resources and each other's time. So let's try and revisit that issue of what this is all about in substance, not in form. The second point I would like to make is that, and yes, I'm part of the hosts, and my organization is. So I'm responsible for teeing up the substance and the topic of conversation. But I still would like to take the privilege to challenge it, even as I represent an organization that participated in this. When we're talking about reparation, we are focusing, as we do well too often, on a third part. We are externalizing. We want somebody else to do what is right by us. When we talk about justice, all too often, actually, we do the same. We want other people to practice justice vis-a-vis we, the Africans. But we don't pay too much attention to what we are doing to each other. And I would argue that until we address the issue of what we do to each other, the others will not pay attention to this issue. We need to become credible through what we do for ourselves and to each other. And then we'll have a leg to stand on in addressing the other to do the right thing by us. Every moment, I think, again, we'll be found wanting people challenge. How are we running our countries? What are we doing to our citizens? Let me get a leg to stand on and credibility to ask somebody to respect us, to be just to us, and so on and so on. So I think we've got a lot of work to do in terms of delivering on the substance and not on the form. Let me leave my comments at that. Enough, because I don't have enough time to go on and on about this issue. But for me, it's a passion. We now need to take responsibility. Trump is actually helping us because what Trump has done is nothing new. But for a lot of us, how it was being done before was too subtle, and we didn't understand it. Trump has come out and bluntly said to us, listen, guys, this is how we run our affairs vis-a-vis you. If we don't get it now, we'll never get it. But it's always been the same. He's just put it very bluntly. Okay, thank you. Now let me move on. Has to introduce our keynote speakers. So let me start with, I'm reversing the order. Alice Mukwe, the Dr. Alice Mukwe, who is sitting right there in front of me, the director of the Botswana Center for Human Rights and president of the International Federation of Human Rights, or FIDH in short. Alice is a director of the Swanelo, right? The Swanelo, the Botswana Center for Human Rights. She is also president of the International Federation for Human Rights, a position she has held since 2019. Alice Mukwe has been a human rights activist since in the 1990s. Her background is in law, public policy, African studies, international relations, and mediation. Their work has included active engagement domestically, regionally, and internationally with civil society, government, and regional and international human rights bodies. I'm going to leave it at that. If you want to know a lot more about Alice Mukwe, please either talk to her if you are in the room or go to Dr. Google and you'll get to know. Now, our second keynote is Professor Tulisile Madonsela, who is suspect to those who are in the room actually does not need an introduction. But for the sake of the others who are further afield, let me just read a small bit of their bio. I'm not going to read all of it because I think we would like to rather focus on having a conversation. And again, we can do the same, go find it from Dr. Google. But Professor Tuli is the director of the Center for Social Justice in the Faculty of Law at Stellenbosch University and the Law Trust Research Center, chair professor of law in social justice studies. She is the founder of the Tuma Party Foundation for Democracy. You know, Tuma means a kind of democracy, leadership, and literacy, a member of the African Academy of Sciences. She was recently appointed to the UN Scientific Advisory Board as chairperson of Cities Alliance. He is a member of the International Anti-Corruption Advisory Council and the Global Justice Leaders. Again, that's a short presentation of her bio. If you want to know more, I'm sure you can find out everything you need to know. So can I leave it at that? And let's hope you move to the challenges that. Thank you.
I think we want to try and connect to Professor Tulima Donsela. I don't know if we can find just quickly. She is now online, and we can then hand over to her for the remarks. Also acknowledge those that are online. I do appreciate that there's probably more people online than we have here. So we really want to appreciate those of you that have been able to join us online. Much appreciated, and I hope you'll be able to participate fully. And more importantly, at this moment in time, I hope we can successfully connect Professor Tulima Donsela. Professor Tulima Donsela, thank you so much for joining us, and good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, dear colleagues, and thank you for the privilege of being part of this amazing celebration of Africa's decolonization process.
Thank you so much, and welcome, and over to you for your speech. Thank you so much for your time.
Oh, I didn't realize it's my time. Right. Greetings, dear colleagues, and a special greeting to the organizers of this great event, where we commemorate Africa Day. When I was a student at the University of Swaziland, now Eswatini, this used to be a very big day. We used to design and make clothes for this day in celebration of Africa. And we had speeches about our dreams, similar to the dream that Nkrumah expressed at the founding of the Organization of African Unity. Today, Africa is a continent of paradoxes. How many of you in this room know who is Stephen Wamukota? I can't see you. I can't see you, but it would be interesting to know how many of you know who Stephen Wamukota is, and how many of you know which continent invented mathematics, democracy, and medicine.
Africa.
Very good.
Colleagues, can you hear me?
Yes. You're shy.
There seems to be a bit of a disruption at the back there. Okay. Right, so I have said that we are a continent of contradictions, and many don't know who Stephen Wamukota is. When I ask young people who is Stephen Wamukota, usually they've never heard of him. None of them have also heard about Imhotep or about even Pixley Kaseme. Stephen Wamukota is a 9-year-old from Kenya who invented the very first hands-free washing station to combat COVID-19 and a presidential award for that. And that became the basis from which the automatic hands-free sanitizing stations were created, which were no longer water ones, and which we found in our supermarkets. I just hope that they did pay money for that intellectual property. I don't know how many of you know about M-Pesa,
Yes. Yes. Yes.
which made financial transfers, electronic financial transfers between countries possible without credit card as far back as 2017. Today, 66 million users are using M-Pesa. How many of you know that the very first person to perform open heart surgery, transfer one heart to another person, happened here in Africa, Dr. Chris Barnard. Even the very first penis transfer, not penis transfer, sorry about that, operation happened in this continent. But I think these are just some of the achievements, but this continent has yielded to the world. But they're not just in science, and they're not just modern. Imhotep was an architect, a doctor, one of the first doctors, and philosopher and everything. And if you read some of the texts from Aristotle, not Aristotle, sorry, from Socrates, and from, among others, Plato, even Homer, you will realize that they had had interactions with Africans and they had learned from Africans. And of course, if you learn from someone, you amplify it. I've spoken about what Stephen Wamukota invented. And the version that you found in supermarkets in South Africa and elsewhere in the world were far more improved than the original version that was created by a 9-year-old with whatever materials he could find in rural Kenya. Even in democracy, the term itself comes from Greece, but the organization of communities in a manner that ensures that there's a say by all constituencies in how the collective is governed was there in Africa long before the Greeks came up with democracy. The whole idea of a just world where everyone's humanity is affirmed was mooted right in the middle of colonialism, slavery, and apartheid by Pixley Kaseme, a 23-year-old African student at Columbia University in America. And he believed that one day the world would understand that just as snowflakes don't look alike, genius does not have a color or a continent. And Africa, with its towering pyramids and other architectural marvels, is an equal to other continents. But as we sit here celebrating the formation of the African Organization of African Unity, which became the African Union, and of course, which was also celebrating decolonization, we sit in an Africa where, despite the AU's decision to silence the guns as part of our Agenda 2063, there are wars, conflicts, and displacements affecting millions of persons in our continent. And many of these conflicts have a gendered dimension in that rape as a weapon of war is used. And also the trafficking of women is regarded as part of the spoils of conflict. How many of you remember the slogan, "Bring back our girls"? As we celebrate Africa Day, those girls are still back. Well, some of them came back with babies and both visible and invisible scars.
Mm.
43.9% of people in our continent live in poverty, which is below $2.15 per day. And in some countries, that figure is much higher. Gini coefficients in our continent are wider than elsewhere in the world. So whilst there's been improvements in development, but the fruits of our collective labor are not always shared equitably. So Africa has produced some of the high-living dollar millionaires, whilst many of its people live in abject poverty. And this, as Luigi Tapparelli knew in 1843, is one of the main fuels of conflict in our world. If you look at the conflict in the Congo, yes, we're going to say M23 is troublesome, etc., etc. But if you look at the extent to which the fruits of cooperation and the fruits of owning land together in the Congo, you would ask yourself, is the region from which the rebels are coming or the resistance movement is coming from, is it benefiting equitably from the resources that the country has to produce? Our own country here, we've had challenges of fees must fall, disruptions in KZN, which are often sparked by something that happened there and then, but underlying that is resentment that some are living better than kings, whilst others are living lives worse than kings. But that said, I want us to celebrate the hidden achievements, which include what Africa did before colonialism and some of the achievements I've spoken about now. But one of the challenges that we face as a region, as Africa region, is the epistemology in the world that hides these achievements. So apart from the fact that, yes, we're a continent of we are a continent of achievements and setbacks. And at the same time, though, a lot of these achievements are ignored, which is why many of our children don't know about these achievements. So on a day like today, I don't like us only complaining about injustices within us and injustices against us. I want us to also know that we are both the people who have been wronged through social injustice and the people who triumph against social injustice. We're the people who have been resilient, that's why we're still here, whilst indigenous people in other continents were totally destroyed. So for example, our constitution in South Africa respects those who fought for democracy and those who suffered for justice in our land. But I think we should also respect those who have worked to build the continent, which the South African Constitution does. Why should we respect those who have helped to build the continent, colleagues? It's because a child in the middle of Kilimanjaro, the villages close to Kilimanjaro, or in South Africa, in the middle of Imvaba, a village in the Eastern Cape, gets to see themselves in Imhotep, gets to see themselves in Chris Barnard, gets to see themselves in Stephen Wamokota. So that's the first part. A child gets to know about these hidden achievements and then gets to know that their DNA, the DNA they carry, is the DNA of not just people who were underdeveloped and enslaved, as Walter Rodney tells us, but that child is evidence of resilience, survival, and grit. And therefore, when that child is faced with adversity, as Stephen Wamukota was faced with adversity, when people were dying because of COVID-19 and lack of hygiene and lack of water, instead of just crying about poverty, you then get children who become solvers of Africa's challenges. But secondly, you also get governments who don't go to Europe and anywhere in the West to say, give us technology, give us experts. You get governments that know that actually there's a whole lot of designs in our continent that are looking at solving problems such as crime. For example, zipline drones deliver medicines in Rwanda. And at One Young World, I have met dozens of young people that have invented technologies and AI models that can solve our continent. And what is their problem? Their problem is because of the epistemology that only sees the worst as a crucible of knowledge. These kids are not recognized. These kids are not given the resources that they need to develop the prototypes that they have. But what then happens, they get offered as little as 50,000 rand, sell these to the big companies from elsewhere. One of the Tuma Foundation ambassadors invented something called the marking up, which is an AI that would mark for teachers, and the teacher would create a rubric in it to do the marking, which would then relieve the teachers from doing too much work. And when he now needed financing to scale it, to fully develop it into a functional thing, and to multiply it, he was offered 50,000 rand by one of the international companies. And that's a problem. It wasn't even an international company, actually, it was a development agency. So our governments, as part of injustice, is just not to say, stop gender violence. It is, let's save our children from intellectual property theft. But also, let's not leave them to stagnate when they've invented things. Let's bring them into some kind of hubs where these inventions can be scaled. It is happening in South Africa, Kenya, and other countries, but it should happen at scale so that a child in any village who has the potential of being the equivalent of Einstein is discovered and assisted to reach their full potential. In fact, this is something that the African Institute for Mathematical Sciences does. And for me, it was through the Africa Institute for Mathematical Sciences, AIMS, that I discovered that Africa invented mathematics. And the evidence is the Ishango bone, which for many years was hidden in Europe because they didn't want Africans to know that they could do great things, but also this would undermine the narrative that said colonialism civilized Africa. In fact, the same thing happened here in South Africa with the Mapungubwe development, where it was hidden by one of our universities because, again, it undermined the narrative that colonialism was here to civilize, when actually it was Africa that civilized the world. And it was not just Egypt, which was coming to Egypt. It was the Sudan. It was Ghana when it was still bigger. It was the very first university in the entire world was in this continent. And we need our children to know that, because then they know that the DNA of greatness lies in them as much as it lies in children elsewhere in the world. As Pete Flicker-Samy said, there is no place where genius cannot happen. So what are the green shoots? the green shoots include the fact that we still do have Agenda 2063. We still do have the silencing of the of the guns. Well, it was by 2020. So the vision is still here, the commitment is still there. And then we need to make sure, as our colleague said earlier, that we leverage these guardrails for social justice or fairness among us, within our communities, within our homes, but also social justice between our continent and other continents. And this is possible, but it's possible when the rest of us cease to become perpetual complainants and we become co-creators of the Africa we want. Leveraging Africa's youth, which is 75%, currently under 35, or it's going to be 75% under 35 by 2030. And also leveraging gender equality, which closing education gaps, ensuring social justice within families and within villages, within communities, can drive a massive African renaissance. And to do so, we need to invest in education. We need to invest in freeing the potential of people. And we should stop telling our children that all we're going to give them is jobs. Because again, it sees this continent as a field where others have to come and plant and then harvest. There are no people. We are people. We deserve to own our land. We deserve to own the businesses, and we can. So we need partnerships where Africa is not superior, the rest of the world is not superior. We are working together to free the potential of every person and improve the quality of life of every person through social justice, the advancement of human rights, and good governance. And good governance includes, of course, ensuring that human rights are respected, which I'm certain that my keynote speaker is going to address. Colleagues, thank you. Let's make sure that schools, though, next year, everywhere in Africa, celebrate Africa Day, not only in terms of Africa's lamentation, but also in terms of Africa's achievements, resilience, and hope. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those remarks. Absolutely appreciate it, and thank you so much for being kind with your time. We are honored to have you. Please, even as you have the rest of the day, we will continue to, digest some of the provocations that you've already set the scene for, and we want to appreciate your time. Thank you so much. I'm mindful that time may end up running out. I do believe that you have another commitment to go to, especially at 4 o'clock. And I'm mindful that time may run out, so allow me to move on straight away to my next keynote speaker, so that we can then digest everything after these speakers have spoken. Allow me to then invite Dr. Alex Mokwe. Please, let's give it a big please, you're more than welcome to have a seat. There we go.
I'm short enough.
Yes, you are just down to your motion.
So I shall be sharing my brief reflections for this Africa Day from the viewpoint of an African woman, a human rights and civil society activist. A viewpoint which recognizes the importance of considering what Mamdani refers to as actually existing civil society, to understand its actual formation rather than as a promised agenda for change. It's also a viewpoint which is focused on acknowledging our African knowledge systems, in understanding our African reality and consequently decolonizing knowledge. This in turn will lead to what Gabriel has referred to as a new contextual language, which gives voice, is informed, coherent, and connects with real people in real communities. This is the goal of our gathering today, to amplify the voices of African citizens and communities striving for inclusive development, accountable governance, as well as the realization of Pan-African ideals. So what does it actually mean in terms of the themes which we were told about earlier? As we know,
Africa Day has its roots in the Pan-Africanism ideals of unity and political and economic independence based on our shared African identities, descent, cultures, histories, institutions, etc. The AU, as we've been told, has designated 2025 as the year of reparations. Justice for Africans and people of African descent through reparations. The G20 themes, we've been told, of solidarity, equality, and sustainable development are goals, however, which can only be sustainably attained if both historical and structural injustices have been effectively addressed. We know, even in our personal lives, that our past shapes our present, and without conscious intervention, our future too. So for us on the continent, our past experiences of transatlantic slavery, of colonialism, and of apartheid continue today in a form of coloniality and systemic racial discrimination. It is present in global government systems, in economic, financial, and trade systems, as well as social extractivist development systems. And of course, a new chapter of this development model has been embarked upon with talk of global hunger for the critical minerals in Africa. For us, justice is more than that which is sought through court systems. It encompasses reparation justice, restitution justice, and systemic economic justice through, for example, sustainable financing. So for us to attain sustainable development and true equality, there must be respect for the dignity of Africans. There must be a fundamental transformation in global relations. However, that change needs to start with us, using a decolonial lens in research, analysis, and in practice. In short, how we use our agency and clarity about what needs to be transformed, by whom, for whom, and how that transformation should take place. We are, as reference has been made, all aware of the current global geopolitical context, which is having an impact on our continent and on our communities. These include fundamental shifts in the assumed rules-based order, imposition of tariffs from a particular country, escalations of and in war, and blatant display of double standards and racial discrimination in the global governance practices by those who have hitherto been promoted as standard bearers of human rights and good governance. People of African descent continue to face structural racism and discrimination, leading to inequities in terms of access to health, development, education, housing, property, as well as political participation. And in the midst of these challenges, it's clear, though, that the best way to hope, to regenerate, to find justice, solidarity, and sustainability is to act. And this was the slogan of our FIDH Congress, our 100th Congress in 2022. And what this means is we have to work both within the existing spaces as well as crafting some new spaces, being consultative, using a decolonization approach, and overall being contextually relevant. We've seen social movement deepening through, for example, Trans-Africa's African social movements, Baraza. We've seen African youth not only speak up, but also act, as we saw in Kenya with the Gen Z, and now the Gen Zot, where there was a call for good governance, rule of law, etc. But I think context overall is incredibly important. So how do we begin by contextualizing ourselves? I'd like to take us back to the beginning of our story, to the motu, the muntu, the person. We've been described as being beings in community. This requires the norms and values of collectivism, of humanity, dignity, botu, ubuntu, and dialogue. This is in stark contrast with the Homo economicus of Western neoclassical economic theory. They are autonomous, rational, competitive, consumerist, and act to optimize self-interest. This, we've been told, has enabled what is referred to as wealth maximizing behavior, which is now very apparent in our global world, but we also see it amongst ourselves. So how can we describe this apparent contradiction between communitarianism on the one hand and individualism on the other? Some would chosen to see through the frame of culture. Culture has been described by Pepe Mujica as, quote, unquote, a set of unspoken values that determine the way in which millions of anonymous people around the world relate to each other. Consumerism is part of that culture. It is an ethic needed for capitalism in its struggle for infinite accumulation. Capitalism itself is a culture, and we must respond to and resist capitalism with a different culture. Another way to put it, we're in a struggle between a culture of solidarity on the one hand and a culture of selfishness on the other. Close quote. So conscious solidarity requires self-reflection about personal positionality, about the personal choices which we make, about how we live our lives. So in terms of context, what is the context for our development arguments? Our realities include the injustice of how raw commodities and financial resources benefit the global economy, local elites, and not our people. The injustice of the colonial era decision-making structures in both the global governance and global financial institutions, and the state and civil society reliance on external aid and over-reliance on foreign expertise. Injustice, therefore, includes both historical and contemporary slavery, colonialism, and coloniality. But then what do all these mean for the kind of development, democracy, and justice which we're able to shape? And I look forward to hearing the panel engaging with some of these questions later. But what is key for me is contextualized knowledge. Contextualized knowledge enables solidarity, hope, and regeneration. And what I found to be useful have been at least two considerations. The first is centering Africa as a legitimate epistemic center, or as Ndlovu Gacheni refers to it, locus of enunciation. We need to recognize that our indigenous knowledge has existed and continues to exist. We need to explore how it can be applied in contemporary society in comparison with the generally accepted universalized concepts of justice and indeed even of human rights. The second point is the need to decolonize the normative foundation of universality. This will be particularly important in reducing the dependence of our civil society on external funding, which is often premised on the assumed universalities or shared understandings of concepts and strategies. So working in the human rights space, what has all this meant? Well, as a human rights activist, we do strive to contribute to democratic government and governance, but not as the ultimate goal, but as only a step towards inclusive, sustainable social development and dignity for all. And this means that we need to be consciously critical of our donor civil society relationships. We need to decide when we accept funding. We need to decide to which extent funded activities contribute to strengthening of inclusive social cohesion and sustainable outcomes or do not. We need to decide whether donor-funded activities will contribute to a weakening of our kinship, family, and community-based systems. As we know, unemployed youth turn to family for support. Single mothers who need childcare turn to family for that. Women GBV survivors who need a safe place to stay often turn to family and the kinship system. This is the stuff of our lived realities as Africans. It's a result of our basic societal unit of analysis being family, being community, and not the universalized, globalized norm of individualism, which in fact underpins the international human rights architecture. Even in the public space, it's not often the state to which we first turn, but to the private space of the family. In our realities, there's often no strict separation of the private and the public, unlike, again, in the universalized global norm of how the state should relate to civil. So in the human rights space, the universality of the concept of human rights as a settled norm has been contested by different scholars. Some have done so because they say it's emerged from Western philosophy. Others have challenged it because it appears to be ahistorical and focuses on universality and ends up being a form of continuing coloniality, if not analyzed carefully. Secondly, when examining the concepts of justice, solidarity, equality, and sustainability, we must use our African normative values as a starting point. the global impact, we need to engage and advocate for our normative values begin to be included in conceptualization and analysis. And finally, there needs to be more scholarship on the contextual realities of our communities and our civil society. So both decolonization and de-imperialization require in-depth research to appreciate the extent of the interlinkages between the two processes and how they shape our conceptual thinking in the present. Some have referred to the need for scholar activists who recognize the role of knowledge and how it transforms our social worlds. I have 4 suggestions about how to proceed to amplify the voices of our African citizens, including me. Firstly, to enable active and informed citizenry for effective agency, we need to support contextual, accountable governance. That can be done through safe, inclusive, intergenerational convenience, as well as dialogue spaces for mutual listening and learning, including indigenous knowledge transfer, guided by our African values of Botho and Ubuntu, sharing humanity, collectivism, dignity, as well as locally rooted custom. This can be a contribution towards the regeneration process of transformation. Secondly, I'm going to conscious, community-centered, collective, inclusive approaches to engagement in our spaces and development, as well as when we're engaging with democracy. And this can be one way of contributing to the building of solidarity for transformation. Thirdly, thought spaces for intellectual reflection and continued development of African scholarship can provide space for engagement in relation to hope for transformation. And finally, we need to know our positionality, who we are, understand our own value base, and how to engage in a conscious way. We need bold leadership, leaders who are prepared to engage with what I call the pluriversality of universalities, recognizing there isn't one universality. Leaders who are prepared to reflect and act on the failure of neoliberalism to deliver sustainable development for our people. Leaders who are prepared to confront the failure of multi-party elections of liberal democracy to deliver lived democracy for our people. Leaders who are able to reflect on possible contextually appropriate alternatives of inclusive participation, representation, equity, and accountability. And this may help us contribute to sustainability for transformation. And before I close, I'd like to just share a little story. You know, when you engage, the assumed silently shapes conversations as well as innuendo. And it's the assumed of shared concepts when you engage in it, shared meanings, shared understandings. And in a meeting with a Western donor, my colleagues at our organization in Botswana, the Botswana Center for Human Rights, we forgot and we lapsed into what we call our contextual language of communication. And this includes addressing one another as uncle, auntie, or the mother of your first child, etc. You understand, the African way of engaging. But we did it in the office, in the presence of a Western donor. And of course, the reason we engage like that, it is to show respect for the individual as a member of community, regardless of the official position they have in the office. Right? So I'm known as Mark. I'm director of the organization, but because our oldest child is Mark, I'm known as Mark. She's now no longer working at the office, but the oldest person in the office was Mother Catherine, and she was responsible for the tea and the coffee and the cleaning. So we retained our positionality, our understanding of who we are, even when we're not in the private space, but in the public space of the office. So we had this conversation and started saying Uncle so-and-so and Auntie so-and-so. The reaction of the donor immediately there was a real concern that we may have been running a family organization. The panic was probably. That's what we learned, is that local civil society needs to know itself. We need to know when to use our Tswana context-appropriate language amongst ourselves. It's shaped by what we share, our history, our language, our culture. but also when to use Western donor appropriate language when we're talking to development partners. And that language reproduces its own historical, socio-political, and cultural nuances, including coloniality. And we also have learned that we need to craft a language which comprises of both worlds, which is reflective of our actually existing more authentic selves, enabling us to talk with and not past one another. Values-based authenticity is essential for sustainable transformation to the African river, to all to live in and with dignity. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much for those remarks, and of course, voting, without doubt. We're really looking for some of the things that you've just thrown to everyone, and I'm sure that once we get into the panel discussions and the questions, some people, and I'll give an opportunity for some people to perhaps throw questions at you, if I may, if you linger long enough. If you linger long enough, please be kind to. You're not going to provoke us and then leave. That's not work very well. So please be kind to linger enough for us to just be able to interact with you and as far as questions are concerned. There's a at this moment in time to invite a couple of people that are just going to lead us through a panel discussion, but I'm mindful that we're sort of running, time is running away. And I said earlier on, I don't want to fulfill the stereotype of African time. So I will find a way of just constraining some of these things, and so if I can. Online joining us for the discussion is Professor Cheryl Hendricks. Professor Hendricks, I don't know if you can just indicate if you are there, just unmute yourself. We'd love to just hear from you, even as we prepare for this panel discussion. And Professor Hendricks is going to speak a little bit around in and around the area of justice. That is where she's going to touch a little bit. And then also from Minds, we've got Dr. Catherine Namakura also on the online space. Dr. Catherine, if you can, do unmute yourself and just put your camera on. We'd love to just see you even as you engage in the conversation. And Dr. Namakura is going to speak in and around the issue of hope and regeneration. And I'm going to give them an opening, sort of a moment to put a couple of opening remarks, maybe for 3 minutes or so. We don't have too much time. Remarks on the different topics. And then also speaking on solidarity this afternoon, speaking on solidarity is going to be Bonnie and Rondo. She's in the room. And thank you so much, Bonnie, for joining us. We really appreciate it. Bonnie, please be kind to just join us here and find the best sitting room. If you can, which is somewhere here for our discussion, if you can. Let's give her a hand, and let's just give them a hand. Professor Jacob Marty, from CAPSI, is going to be joining us, and he's going to focus and zero in and around the issue of sustainability. In and around the issue of sustainability, even as we engage in our topic. And last but not least, we want to hear the voice of the youth, and I think it's quite essential that the youth are heard in these kind of conversations. And from SIOSH, Kamala Dixon is also joining us on. Kamala, if you're there, please be kind to just, switch on your camera and your mic, and let's have conversations in and around what we want to discuss this afternoon, if you can. All right. Thank you so much. Much appreciated. Let's perhaps kickstart the conversation by getting a couple of remarks for your opening comments on this topic from Professor Cheryl Hendricks. Professor Hendricks, I think today's theme, aptly, as we have said, that justice, solidarity, sustainability for Africa, pathways for hope and regeneration for one Africa. Perhaps just to give you an opportunity, Professor Hendricks, just to give you opening remarks in and around the role of justice, as we find pathways of hope and regeneration for one Africa. Is this justice possible? And would it one Africa? Please do share your thoughts, perhaps.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to keep my mic off because I really can't hear you very well. My camera off, that is. Just to say, I'm delighted to be here with everybody. It was good to hear the keynote addresses by Prof. Madonsela and Dr. Mogwe. I think they were spot on there. Also, Dr. Moyo, thank you for reminding us, especially in South Africa, about Africa Day and why it's so important that we celebrate it. Something founded already in 1958, but something that we have to continue to reassert because of the multiplicity of violences that still are with us today. And as Prof. Tuli had indicated, yes, we have all of these challenges, but we must also use this particular day to celebrate our achievements and giving us some insight there. I really want to speak to this theme of justice for Africa and people of African descent through reparations, which is the AU's theme, as you have noted. I think that in a geopolitical context of greed, of might is right, of transactional politics, and where there's a profound lack of solidarity, empathy, and unity, refocusing us on our core Pan-African values is essential. Pan-Africanism has been, is, and should continue to be our guiding principles. I firmly believe that it is able to provide the world with new pathways to peace because it emphasizes our common humanity and our destinies are intertwined, that the world is interdependent, and we must therefore emphasize our collective security, human security, not only for Africans, but for the world globally. So I want to highlight 3 points: the need for reparations, the need for us to organize ourselves in the spirit of Pan-Africanism, to manage our natural resources in a responsible way for the sake of the future of this continent, and to reiterate that current geopolitics forces us to be adaptive, reflexive, and innovative, but also provides us with an opportunity to resituate ourselves as thought leaders to chart new progressive pathways and futures for everyone. So reparations, as we know, is part of a larger process of peace building and reconciliation, both of which are fundamentally premised on justice. We always say there can be no peace without justice. Transitional justice, in which reparations is firmly located, seeks accountability and repair for past violations and injustices. It's victim-centered, and it reasserts the need for human dignity and for recognition of and compensation for harms, so that these heinous acts of violence will not be committed again. It's about righting past wrongs of slavery, colonialism, apartheid, racism, and I always add the wrongs committed in the post-colonial era. The armed wars, climate change, gender-based violence, illicit financial flows, and the new forms of exploitation of our critical minerals. For this, we require reparations. We cannot transform our societies and our relations with those who have committed these atrocities until they have been duly addressed. But have we spent sufficient time among ourselves as Africans to get consensus about the processes for doing so? And what we need to see happen to feel that we have acquired reparations? Who must do what, I think, is a big question here. Beyond the rhetoric, what practical ways are we setting out to achieve this in Africa? We know that reparations is not a new phenomenon, coming there from World War I, World War II, Germany, Japan, etc., all paid reparations. It's a well-established method for redress for gross human rights violations. Why, 60 years later, after making these calls, have we as Africans not achieved it? We see already in 1993, the OAU developing a declaration on reparations, calling for full monetary payment through capital and transfer of the cancellation, and setting up a committee of reparations, but nothing happens. We see at the UN Health Conference on Racism and Racial Discrimination, the call is there, but nothing gets implemented. Now we have a new call here. The AU also released now in May 2025 another declaration, and it's calling for the establishment of comprehensive reparations a framework for doing so, financial and economic reparations, symbolic restitution and historical recognition, including formal apologies and the return of cultural artifacts, institutional reform and public education. But are we going to pursue this? Because next year the AU will move on to another theme. Will this just be another nice sounding document? I want to move to my second point here, which is for us to organize ourselves in the spirit of Pan-Africanism to be more responsible about our natural resources. Our societies are fractures, marred by violence at all levels, and we all know that there's now a new scramble for Africa and a remilitarization of our continent. But the intent is the same, to plunder our natural resources, and we are found wanting again. We often say that there's an irony here, that we have the potential to be one of the richest continents, but we remain the poorest. What particular set of structural relations keep us in this position? What particular mindsets of our leaders refuse to address this wrong? According to the ISS, we hold approximately 30% of the world's critical minerals, and we hear this all the time. We can in effect switch off the lights for the rest of the world. There will be no fourth industrial revolution or artificial intelligence without these minerals that are here on the continent. So what is our collective strategy to ensure that we are able to utilize these resources to ensure prosperity for all on the continent? What is the vision? Where is the leadership? On a continent that will in 2063 have 3 billion people, the majority of them being youth. If we don't get justice, reparation to correct the past wrongs and current wrongs, we're not going to go very far. So first, I want to call us also, as Alice indicated, to be bold and to continue to assert our rights, to continue to ask, or not even ask, to demand debt relief, because here we are overburdened, 685 billion US in debt on this continent. Second, to rebuild our social movements so that we can assert the necessary counterforce to this. And third, we must support our institutions and formations that are trying to push for these agendas at all odds. The bus is moving here, the momentum for reparations is going. But we must also go beyond symbolic gestures. So I'm urging us all this year to collectively work together and with the diaspora who have been working on this issue for a number of years now, far advanced on this, that we collectively work together to achieve reparations. That this is not merely going to be the theme for Africa, for the African Union for this year, but something that we actively go out there to seek to achieve. That is one way for us to achieve justice on this continent. I thank you.
Actually, on the remarks, so thank you so much. I think you've already just had a lot in the direction. Reparations, perhaps. Thank you so much. And we'll come back with some questions. Please, if you do have your questions, just write them down somewhere. And I'm mindful of time again, as I did say, I will get some more questions so that we can combine my questions and your questions and we bring you into the conversation. With me again, we've got the Management Community Fund and also the APN, we'll be speaking about solidarity and the way of solidarity. And I'm thinking of this very simple example. A few months ago, President Zelensky went to the US and obviously a smaller movie directed by right? And did you see the response of Europe in general? Collective spectrum about nothing, about black holes in the world. And then, of course, recently we had part 2 of that same series, but it's going to happen from this time as well. Right? The things are himself. Did you see the common silence about how in general it was? And so the question is there any form of solidarity on those levels for us to then find pathways to hope and regeneration for one Africa, or is everyone just doing their own thing?
Thank you very much. So, I'm here on behalf of the African Philanthropic Network, a group of African organizations that are looking at how we can strengthen African philanthropy. And so I'm going to be talking about solidarity from a philanthropic perspective, if you'll allow me. And I think there's a lot that's been said about Pan-Africanism already. And one of the key tenets of Pan-Africanism is solidarity. And I think there's also some of our speakers have already spoken about philanthropy spoke about who's funding the work, how are they funding it, why are they funding it. And I think from that perspective, the issue of philanthropy is important to engage with when speaking about solidarity. So I've got, I think here maybe 4 points if time allows. The first one is I want to reflect on the fact that African philanthropy is not born out of a surplus. So we've got a lot of foundations that are born because people are so rich they don't know what to do with their wealth. But our philanthropy is not based on surplus. We don't give because we have a surplus. We give because we believe in the cause. We give because we believe and identify with that cause. And for me, that's a key aspect of solidarity. And I think we ought to be thinking about how we embrace that and stand in solidarity with each other. So even if it were my last meal, I would still share it with a brother because I believe that the brother is in need. Or should I be saying the sister? The second point I just want to highlight is that African philanthropy is often more than an expression of generosity. It's driven by a belief that our well-being is interconnected, our well-being is intertwined. And I know we often use the word ubuntu. I sometimes feel that it's probably an overtraded word in this space. You hear everybody talking about ubuntu, sometimes out of context. But as I was thinking, as I was thinking through what you shared with you, there was something that came to mind, which is izandla ziyahlangana in my language, and I think it exists in many other languages. And it's not so much the transactionality of if you do this for me, I will do the same for you. But it's an understanding that, or a belief that I will give because I too will receive. And it might not be receiving from me, and it might not be receiving in the same form of materiality that I gave. It might be in goodwill. That is enough. It might be in blessings for some of us who are spiritual, and that is acceptable and is enough. But I think the important thing to note is that there is a recognition that no man exists as an island. And when I give today, I will receive tomorrow. The third one I want to talk about is for African philanthropy is often also more than a source of sustenance. So we don't give because the next person needs, right? And I'll tell you a story. A couple of weeks ago, I was at a funeral. A cousin had passed away. And when I got there, I was given the responsibility and task of receiving some of the contributions from the community. Now, this is a rural context. And so wearing my development hat, I looked for a pen, I looked for a notebook, because of course, it's a donor registry, right? That's how we say it. And somebody say, but why don't you want to write these things down? Why don't you want to write the contributions? And I realized that I was out of context, because that's not how we work as Africans. Record of who gave what and when. And when I saw some of the gifts, I mean, I'm not going to call them gifts, I don't think it's an appropriate term, but I can't think of anything appropriate right now. But when I saw some of the contributions that were made, there was an elderly woman who came through, and she was with her son or his grandson perhaps, and he was carrying a bag of food. And the family, the bereaved family, was quite a well-off family. So they were not in need of food. Yeah? But here's someone who's coming with a bag of food. And it's not so much because we give because we believe that there's a need. We give as part of social cohesion. We see our giving as part of our sense of community. The last one I want to speak to quickly, if I still have time, is, we often talk about the giving that happens when we process. So a neighbor's house gets burnt down, we all come together and contribute and so on and so forth. But I would like us to explore areas where African giving has been institutionalized. Because some of, when we talk in the context of philanthropy, when we think about, some of the gaps in how we've defined African philanthropy, we often talk about how uninstitutionalized it is. But when I think back at myself growing up in a rural area, there were families that were recognized as vulnerable, and there were contributions that were made to ensuring that that vulnerability is mitigated. There was no household with an elderly who went without plowing, because we would all come together as a community and contribute a plow, cattle, an ox, this, that, or the other, labor, and so on and so forth, followed by heaven. And for me, that includes the concept of ispalas and goals, where we all contribute whatever we've harvested into a common pool, which is understood to be then shared and distributed based on need within our community. That, for me, is a form of institutionalization. And I think that the task for us now is to think about how do we scale up, how do we better institutionalize some of those very important practices that are rooted in our social cultural values.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for those remarks. I'm told let's avoid the mic. I think it's easier to hear us for the online team without the mic. So we'll keep it that way. Thank you so much for those remarks. Online, if you may, please do join us in the conversation. And he's going to be speaking. He's going to give a couple of remarks and opening remarks in and around hope and regeneration for One Africa. Hope and regeneration for One Africa. Dr. Mamgola, if you can hear us, would love to hear your opening remarks. And what I'll do is, after I take the opening remarks from Professor Mati and Mr. Dixon, I think I will move straight away to the questions so that you are engaging our panelists, mindful of the time that we have. Good afternoon on this side of the world.
Good afternoon, Chairperson. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be able to participate in this critical conversation. I bring greetings from the UFS and also from the UN Working Group of Experts on People of African Descent, where we are joining the world to celebrate a day for global Africa. This January 2025, the global community commenced the second UN decade on people of African descent, which was declared by the UN General Assembly in December last year. And it's based on the pillars of recognition, justice, and development. So we are going to have 20 years of focus on matters concerning people of African heritage. And it's so critical for us that we are beginning the decade with Africa's Year for Reparation under the theme that we have already discussed. And we are speaking of recognition of people of African descent as contributors to civilization worldwide, as the panelists have already mentioned. We are talking of justice to Africans for the gruesome legacies of the past that are still with us. Those matters have already also been spoken to by some of the preceding speakers. And when we say that some of the issues are still with us, we look at, for example, the effects of the decrees of 1937 that spread around the empire, or the British Empire at the time, that excluded Africans from owning land in a radius of 30 kilometers from any urban area. This happened in Uganda, it happened here in South Africa, and many other parts. And this has determined the wealth distribution amongst races, their representation in supply chains, in business, and in circles of wealth. Our children, as Professor Madonsela, whom I admire so much, has already spoken to, need to know some of these critical things, that this poverty we see here is knitted and structured in policies of the world and delivered through aspects like deliberate sanctions, control of the media and narrative, control of African history that perpetuates racial hierarchies, biased education curricula, and global financial systems that continually subjugate Africans. At the international level, we are continuing to seek racial justice at that level. We're continuing to seek reparatory justice, environmental and spatial justice, digital justice, and digital equity. The other pillar is the full development of people of African descent, and we are fighting for this to be in the Declaration for the Human Rights of People of African Descent. And this is not an easy job because the world does not, they always ask us, what do you mean by development as a right? And from the African perspective, we are looking at those bottlenecks, those barriers that are actually deliberately inhibiting the development of Africa, no matter how much it tries. Chairperson, I just wish to also reiterate or talk about an experience I had as chair of the working group in 2023 when I visited the UK. I had a conversation with Lord Ahmed of Wimbledon, who was actually affirming that the education, that the UK was contributing impactfully to the education of Africans. That may be true, but I also have a contrary view that the educational impact of the empire in Africa benefits more of the UK and giving us migration problems because it has placed the UK and the Western world in the hearts and minds of multitudes of Africans. Then eventually they just choose a few of those that they need, and of course the ones that are exceptionally excellent as well many times, and then leave the rest to dream about the UK and other destinations from here in Africa and have no relevance in our continent. So we should really interrogate some of the core causes of why actually many innovation might be at the level at which it is in the continent. The desire to conquer and control the African has corrupted global conscience for centuries, and African resistance to that unfavorable reality has also been justifiably clear. So perhaps I'll conclude by saying that let's recognize ourselves and our own as contributors to our own civilization and the betterment of the world. The keynote speakers have already spoken greatly to that. Let's cherish and affirm our identity as equal in worth. Let's wear our hair with pride, accept our skin unapologetically, and validate our dignity among ourselves. It's also time to orchestrate our own justice, what we call self-reflective reparation. Professor Moyo was actually going into that direction. Our own responsibility to free ourselves from mental slavery. What has been put in our minds that makes us prefer others and not our own, that talks well about somebody else and not ourselves. But as well, we have to continue to demand for reparation, the stopping of the continued victimization of the continent and its people, the extortion that leaves a lot going to other continents and then leaves the challenge for us to develop with no tools. That is a mockery of justice. I also conclude by saying that the African conscience must resonate in our education, in our childcare and development, the digital space, our daily work and service. Let's embrace the responsibility of being present in our own lives, in our own generation, and in our own space. It is only then that we'll harness the gift of our natural environment, which others have fought to access and retain control of at all costs. And I think that is the secret of our healing and sustainable futures for us. And as others have said, it begins with us. Thank you very much.
A pleasure. Thank you so much for those remarks. Also appreciate it. I just want to try and move on to the others, and I'm mindful again, the people that are in the room would love to engage. Also, if I may just bring in Kamala Dixon from SIOF, and of course, representing the youth in this case. And one of the things that is pretty obvious is that most African liberation struggles were fought by young people, but most African countries are governed by old people. it is a complexity that, some young people, after they liberate, do not leave the seat for the next young people. I think we must continue to hear the voices of young people in and around, what we are talking about today. Mr. Kamala Jackson, please, over to you just to give your opening remarks. And then after that, Professor Marty will give his remarks. And then I think I want to go straight to the questions, lest, we monopolize the platform. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think I'm audible.
Yes, you are.
Can you hear me? Okay,
Yes, you are.
Okay. So sorry, I need to greet you all in the name of Pan-Africanism. Sorry. Aluta continua. Amada. Thank you so much for celebrating the African continent. And we are very, very happy as young people to be part of this discussion. So I think what we need to reflect on after 60 years of independence, one should be why are the young people still leaving the African continent and seeking good life in Europe or other countries? We have observed a big number of young people leaving their countries, which is Africa, and seeking or going to seek new life in other continents. And if you compare today's generation and our forefather, for them they were chained actually, and they were hunted as animals to be taken in Africa. But today we are assembling a long line on the embassies seeking for a visa, but others they are using illegal ways, others they are dying in the ocean to go to European countries. That tells that there is somewhere where we need to have a friendly discussion on the continent and the young generation. What is not happening that can let the young generation stay in the continent? For example, a few days ago, actually I should declare the interest, even myself, I'm supporting the movement. We have seen the rise of young readers, and some of you know Ibrahim Traore. I've seen like the All Africa, the young people, they are supporting him. And all over the internet, everywhere, they are talking about Ibrahim Traore. But the question I'm asking, is it that we are tired of our leadership? Are we tired of democracy? Are we not seeing the results of what's happening through our countries? Why everyone is seeing Ibrahim Traore as the savior of Africa and someone who can unite Africa, all because he's young? So that's gave me something to think more about our continent in the future. But we have seen some few things that he has done in a short period of time that actually has proved that if Africa can invest the resources within the countries, can actually change the life of young people. We have seen how he has invested in industries. We have seen on how they are creating employment and how they are building city, but also utilizing the natural resources until the imperialists or the big countries, they are shaken on how they are trying to use those resources to develop people. So maybe at some point that can keep the young people in their continent if the resource is well managed. But lastly, I'm concluding. Lastly, I need to put these questions. For example, we have a lot of schools here in Africa, universities. For example, even in my country, in Tanzania, we have a school of engineering. A lot of engineering have been produced in my. So every construction, big, small, is Chinese company. So you're asking, why are you establishing a school engineers, but they're not on the ground. You are just having full of operating. We have produced doctors in our schools, but you have a lot of hospitals with no doctors, the deficit of doctors, but a lot of doctors are in the street. So this tells us that at some points we need to think on how we are restructuring the African economy to bring the hope for the young generation. The narrative should be now we should look and focus on how our products, whatever we are producing in Africa, should remain in Africa to make sure that Africa is developed. That's one. But the second, I think we need to look on how we are financing we are financing on how we are injecting money in the young youth-related projects. We're talking about agriculture, for example. If you look at the budget, how much do we allocate in agriculture for the young people who are in the sector or those who are in the startups? So it's us as creating a new hope for the new generation, actually to invest in the projects that are youth related and will also create markets, because you cannot encourage young people to get into creative, to get into agriculture, and the next day you are importing sugar from Brazil, you are importing toothpaste, and everything from China. You will not be creating the economy for young people. So let's have a clear discussion, a friendly discussion on that. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Mr. Diskin. Thank you so much for those remarks, and of course, some of the critical issues concerning the youth, and of course, the rise of a young leadership, of course, and some of the saved achievements of what we hear, and of course, those are subjects that we can engage further, whether what we are hearing about some of the leadership is true or verifiable in the first place. But I'm sure we can engage those. Professor Mati, let's bring you into the discussion in and around sustainability. And I know there's quite a number of issues in and around sustainability, issues of food security in Africa, social and green innovation, sustainable finance, and of course issues of illicit flows, for example, in Africa, that create big challenges. So let's hear your own remarks in as far as these issues are concerned, and then after that I will quickly move on to get engagement from the people that are in the room.
Thank you, Lawrence. Thank you, our guests and the hosts this afternoon. After the young man has spoken, probably what I have belongs to the archives. I think he's captured quite a lot very well. But I think we need to take a historical look, because I think quite a good number of everyone who has spoken talks of probably the good old days. Just before we came here, Professor Moyo was challenging us to the old ways that Africans would be able to manage their own things. But, and to some extent, the fact that we are alive today and in this room, and so many other Africans, probably is a testament of Africa's resilience, despite all the shocks that you've had to go through. Those particular shocks are immense, especially in the recent past, on matters climate change. We have new types of disasters which, to some extent, are very, 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 very alien. I'm talking about cyclones that are becoming more and more persistent. When I grew up in rural Kenya, I learned swimming in a river. Some years ago, I took my then 10-year-old daughter to show her where I learned swimming. And it's a stream now. And it's like, are you crazy? And the story here is that our resources are getting depleted. And out of that, the sustainability that we all aim for is probably neither here nor there. And the reason for that is that the more we deplete these particular resources, our demands today future generations will not be able to get there. Yeah. So my daughter will never be able to learn how to swim in that river. It's non-existent anyway. Or the only time it is a river, it's floods and comes and carries everything. Okay, and with that, the food security issues become very, 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 very critical because, again, I come from a community where droughts, yes, there were droughts and famines. They actually had names and specific years that they would be as markers. These days, they're so common that probably every month would have its own its own mark in terms of a name. What am I saying by this? That these disasters have also become, or droughts or floods, even here in Southern Africa. I think the last 2 years have been, last year and the year before, floods or droughts, the whole of Southern Africa. So intense that we have never seen anything to that extent. So I think there's something that speaks to what do we need to do. And I think we need to go back into the good old days that we are told. There have been several innovations in the Sahel over the years, some of them even in our own midst. Some years ago, those of you that may be familiar with, and some of these are a gender justice issue embedded into them. Those that may be familiar with the Green Belt movement, probably the more famous name is Wangari Maathai, a Kenyan woman, the first African woman to win the Nobel Prize for Peace. It is around being able to make the connections between the environment, food, livelihoods, but also the gender justice issues or gender perspectives. So I think these are critical things that at universities, for instance, here, maybe this is a commercial moment, we have all these elements that we have embedded, for instance, in our MBA, that we have embedded in our Masters in African Theology and others. So much so that the lamentation that we hear from Professor Mandosela, that we need to let our younger people be familiar of our histories, but it's also to be familiar of what is it that has been done in terms of solutions that are local, solutions that are very African-based, and it's building on indigenous knowledge systems that I think it's quite important. Again, the more you look at some of these things and you hear words that we have invented and that we exported to us, watershed management and all soil erosion management, they are not new. These things have been there since time immemorial. You go to certain places and you find them. And then I think my last point has to do with the element of sustainable financing, especially in all the chaos that we have now, the crisis of multilateralism, or the death of it. We're now talking about the aid world. So you probably don't need to continue worrying about those nomenclatures of uncle what. We may have to look ourselves deeply and ask, can we continue relying heavily on resources that come from someone else? Or do our governments need to invest so that we build resilient, sustainable solutions for ourselves? I understand that Nigerians say, I don't know whether it's Nigerian, that if your hands are in somebody else's pocket, you have to keep on following them. Frank has told you to keep off your hands off the pockets. This is the opportunity. Thank you.
Let's take some questions. If we can, let's just try as much as possible. If you're making remarks, just be as quick, just a minute, 30 seconds, a minute, and so we try and get as much contributions from the room as possible. I would really appreciate. If you have a specific question for a specific panelist, please be kind to indicate, and you can also speak to Dr. Mokwe also a presentation if she's still in the room. As part of the conversation. So let's start with yourself, and thank you for that.
Thank you to the panelists, and my question is directed to Umam on the matter of orality as well as epistemological positioning of women and girls being the carriers of tradition and so on. Judging from the fact that orality is something that is slowly but surely starting to fade in our communities, particularly with the girlfriend. So otatobao are no longer available to tell and carry the traditions of the home and the village and the community. How, as someone whom, when you were speaking, you were using orature, most of the speech that you were making, how are you able now to bridge that gap whereby you teach these girls and future girl generations to actually impart knowledge in that way? Thank you.
Again, the gist of the question, I'm going to take 3 questions. It allows you to think. Otherwise, that is a good thing sometimes with that. Take another question while you think of your answer, and unless if all 3 questions are for you, that's when your challenges will come. Good, sir?
Thank you so much. I think it was mentioned that university started in Africa. How does then university today remind us of the hidden histories in terms of the language that we use, the methodology? How do we accept Africa's greatness in its, full scale when we're using the colonizers' languages and tools? Because I think the language that we use, it's limited. This question is directed to Prof. Chulima Donsela. As far as she's mentioned Imhotep, because Imhotep is the father of medicine, and the Sumerian doctrine teaches us that he was coming from the south. So I think most of the knowledge about Africa is available outside of Africa. So this homogeneous idea of Africa and of Europe, it's, yeah.
All right. Prof. Madusela, I think, has left the room, from my understanding, from a time perspective. I don't know how we'll channel the question, but if someone in the room can answer the question, I'll gladly.
She might be here, I think, because she's still on the thing. But you can take the next question and then she'll confirm.
Right. I'll be happy to come back to that. Another question while Prof engages the question. There we go.
So my question is directed to Dr. Mogwe. How can we ensure that human rights are protected and promoted in Africa?
All right, human rights question. And let's start with the first question. The role of Omama and the girl child in continuity, as has been asked by the gentleman.
It's an interesting question, Buti. I'm going to call you that because you called me Mama, ne? So I think we need to start by just, is there a recognition of the importance of indigenous knowledge systems? And do we see the value and therefore the value of them and therefore the value of preserving them? And I think that's where we need to start. And I would argue that not a lot of us see the value in those indigenous knowledge systems. So the question you're asking is not just a question for me. I think it's a question that can be directed to a lot of people in the room, including that word who spoke to Kawelas, who spoke about folklore at the beginning, right? And she said, this is how education is passed down from generation to generation. So my immediate reaction would be to say, our societal configuration has changed. The anonymity that comes with urban living, urban societies, the disintegration of extended family, and so on and so forth, actually poses a limitation to the extent to which we can maintain that orality. And so we need to be asking ourselves, do we value indigenous knowledge systems? And if we do, what is the investment we need to make in making sure that we perpetuate it? So, by the way, I'm a grandmother, and a very conscious grandmother at that. And so those are some of the things that I engage with as I think about what the role that my grandmother played and the role that I could play to my granddaughter.
Right. Hope you answered. Thank you so much. It looks like you've been tasked with
the question.
Yes.
I'll stand up because then I'm visible to people at the back. The question was not addressed to me, it was addressed to Mehir. But I'd also like to just add a little bit sort of reflection. One of the things, if you look at the human rights approach in relation to women and gender issues, we find from the civil society space is a lot of funding for the girl child and women. And one of the things I've been speaking with donors about is, you know, in terms of our understanding of communities made up of different genders, right? We know that Trump has said there are only two. We'll not go into that discussion right now. But the focus on women has partly, I think, contributed to this backlash we're finding with toxic masculinity. We're finding with the incel discussion. We're finding with Andrew Tate, who is becoming popular on our continent as well, which is disturbing. And there is need to ensure that we engage the boy child and young men to begin to try and reimagine community and recognizing that both men and women and other genders are part of community and try and build that social cohesion. That was the one thing. The other was in relation to human rights, your question. And I think it was triggered by the fact that I spoke about international human rights really emerging from an individualistic or individual rights. You know, you often hear about individual human rights. And you know that the African Charter talks about human and people's rights, because as Africans, we also speak to the collective and groups, as opposed to the other forms of international instruments which you find, like the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And I think for us in Botswana, when we're doing our human rights work, we've learned over time not to go into a rural area and start talking about human rights. You have a right to do this, you have a right to that, but try to find a way of contextualizing it. So we often start Gaboto, right? A person is not able to live with dignity, living with Boto. And even if you're talking gender-based violence, when you're violent towards another person, is that a way of behaving with Boto or with Ubuntu? And then you start building from that. So that is how I see human rights. I often say my human rights did not start because of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. My human rights awareness started from the time I was a child, when I was always called to come and greet elderly people. And I was called as if I had refused to do it. Don't do medicine. You know? So it's familiar, right? You weren't asked nicely, you were told to come and greet, but you grew up being aware that you were part of community and you had a responsibility. Our focus is on responsibility and obligations, not rights, individual rights. It's your obligation to the others, and it's reflected in what Mess said about our African philanthropy. Thank you. Sorry for giving me my back.
Hey, Lawrence, just confirming that Prof. Tuli is still with us if you need the response.
Yes, I would greatly appreciate the response. I do not know if she heard the question, perhaps, or do we need to just rephrase the question for her?
I am here.
Yes, Prof, thank you so much for your time. I think with a question that was framed by the gentleman, maybe if you did not hear it, I'll ask him to just ask you again. So in 30 seconds, let's just rephrase that question for her.
I think at the background of the decolonization project, what is the role of universities with regard to language methodologies? And yeah, how do we embrace Africa in its fullness while we're still using the master's tools? So it was provoked by what you said about Imhotep, who is from the South. I think Imhotep is a very prominent figure. He was the father of medicine, but he was coming from the South. So, and that knowledge about Imhotep and the clothing of the South, it's available outside of Africa. So how do we embrace Africa's greatness while we have a homogeneous idea of what Africa is? Sorry.
I hope you heard that.
I did. Well, thank you, colleague, for that very apt question, and congratulations to the fellow speakers for very insightful thoughts that I hope can be disseminated so that our young people, particularly in the academy, can have sight of these conversations. Universities are doing what they call decolonization, colleagues, as we speak. There's a lot of decolonizing language. For example, at Stellenbosch University, we've worked hard to begin to give isiXhosa the same level of respect as the others. Of course, the struggle there is then to develop concepts that can teach maths, science, and technology in African languages. Incidentally, colleagues, the Department of Education did a study in the Eastern Cape that found that children who are considered to be not smart are actually smart. The problem is when children are taught in a language that is not theirs. They then have to jump first into the new language. Of course, we don't necessarily say our children should be monolingual in a multilingual world. You just saying those early years, it's important that they get these complex concepts seeded in their own language. So that means those at universities need to develop these languages and come up with these concepts. And it can happen. I know in law, there was a Zulu guy, for example, in South Africa, who did amazing work in developing concepts in law. Some were not good enough, but most of them were good enough. I think at the end of the day, for me, what I think we need to do as Africans, enlightened Africans, is to stop complaining and start fixing the problem. For example, in epistemology, our complaint is that we are taught history that only includes us as victims, whether as women or as Africans. It includes us as victims. But we have the power to teach history. I remember when we were at some conference some years ago, and Professor Pitika Ntuli came to that conference about women complaining about being marginalized in the media and everything. And he just made it clear to us that he told us the story that you've all heard about, the grandpa who told these glorious stories of hunting. And every time in his stories, he was always glorious. And the lions seemed to be cowards. And the little boy, after he became a little bit oldish and knew how ferocious lions were, he came to Grandpa and said, "But Grandpa, lions are really, really ferocious. How is it that in your stories they seem to be cowards?" And the grandpa said, "Let the lions tell their own stories." And now the narrative will change when the lions have their own storytellers. So we now have the capacity to tell our story. And one of the colleagues, I don't know whether it was Kamala Dixon, who said that he reminded us about the fact that what we know about Africa, about Imhotep, about maths, about science, about technology, about engineering, all of the things that we gave to the world. What we know about even the Egyptologists who are African, we know from overseas. It's because Americans or African Americans decided, let the lions tell their own stories. And I think we can aid that. And in our case, we don't have to tell only the stories of Imhotep. There's many stories now of young Africans that have invented things. Whilst our leaders are looking elsewhere for solutions, let us demarginalize the stories of these young people at the university, but go beyond the academy. Just, for example, my daughter, Wenzile, pulled us together to write a book. It's called Melo's Kingdom. It's about African stories retold in our own way. But in that story, we decided deliberately to make the main character Queen Zinga. And we say a little bit in the story, it's called Melo's Kingdom, the book. In the story, we talk about who was Queen Zinga. She was an Angolan woman who faced off with the Portuguese and in many instances won. The only reason, of course, they succumbed, it was they were not fighting settlers, they were fighting Portugal. Sometimes people, when they tell stories of what happened, they always think, oh, a small band of foreigners beat you. What was wrong with you? But you were not fighting the small band here. When things got tough, they brought reinforcements.
Yeah. Yep. Perfect. Thanks so much for that time. Let the lions tell their own story is the sentiment. Dr. Moore, you have a remark, you have a question?
Thank you. I've got an observation and partly comment, partly question. And Professor Madonsela is, I think, the only one who forced us to look at achievements of the past. And I want to gently push against it. And the reason why I want to push gently against it, this story of the lion and the young boy, he was trying to make sense of the stories he was being told about the past. And his current lived experience is part of the reason why I'm pushing against this. In Shona, there is an idiom which says, Matakadya kare hanyara dzivana. And all that says to you is the fact that you once were able to feed your family will not make your children today be satisfied. So my inclination is that stories of the past are okay, but young people today are influenced by their reality today. And that the only way we're going to get to move the needle forward is to succeed today. And only after that will the stories of the past have any power.
Yes.
So when we started Minds, our key pillars was African heritage. And today, I have to be honest with you, we put it on the back burner for exactly this reason. Because my own opinion is that as of today, our behavior as Africans is colonizing the mind of young Africans in a manner that is more potent than any white colonizer ever did. And the reason is because of the behavior and mismanagement of today. Makes young people grow up thinking an African couldn't do anything that works. So although they will not actually verbalize it, our young people want to go to America, they want to go to Europe. They don't want to stay on the continent because their experience of today, their lived reality of today is that we are not capable. And my view, therefore, is that we need to address these incompetencies of today, try to bask in the successes of the past.
Absolutely.
It will not rescue us.
Absolutely. You've taken the provocation from Professor Chilima Donsela, take it back to her to respond. It was a pity. A good leader person knows that you must then afford the person to respond. Professor Chilima Donsela, you want to respond to that perhaps because he took an answer.
Absolutely. I really like the proverb, but please just send it to us. It's an important proverb, and it's in strategy and businesses. It's often said past success can be an impediment to current and future success. That said, there's a science that shows that if you show a child or a person that people like them can do this, have done this, it releases the information that is in their subconscious mind, because the genes of people who lived around Imhotep are in us, but they are latent. And I'll give you an example of the Williams sisters. When the Williams sisters started going into tennis, no black kid had succeeded in tennis. Okay, there had been one woman that had succeeded, but her story had not been told. And they were told that, no, this is not a black kid sport and you're not going to succeed. Their father pushed for it. But after the Williams sisters succeeded, this sport has been dominated by young black girls. Why? Possibility. Before the first person was able to break a certain speed in athletics, nobody thought it could be broken. But now that record has been broken over and over. Why? Because part of what happens to us is we limit ourselves. And you are right, colleague, that by saying we live in the past, but where I am in the world, we never celebrate real achievements. I don't know any conversation that I've been to where people talk about Imhotep, and people talk about mathematics. There's just always a general thing that say we were good, we were well before colonialism. And that past is remembered in terms of our victimhood. So what I'm arguing is not remember the past in terms of our victimhood. Remember the past in terms of the DNA we carry. But if we could do those things then, we can do them now. And this is what Diop, Sheikh Ante Diop, and all of the African Egyptologists have been trying to do is to remember our greatness so that we can be great now. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for those remarks. I think let me take one set of questions. I'm mindful of time. I will keep you on stage, but I will feed you after. Is that okay? It's a big treat for us. So I've just given just 10 minutes. We will be kind to. I want to be kind to appreciate time and also just appreciate some of our colleagues, also from the Kenyan High Commission. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. We absolutely appreciate it. Any burning questions so that I feel like I can greet people when I get outside. Anyone with a contribution? Thank you so much, ma'am. If anyone else, please, before I pick a question, so I've got 1, 2, 3. So I'll take those 3 questions and then I will try and wrap up. Manja, if you allow me, I'll then wrap up from there. Over to you, man.
So my question is to so do minerals deplete over time? And if so, what does that mean for Africa's future in terms of sustainable development, economic justice, and global equity?
Briefly, Prof. Martin.
Okay. So the simple answer is yes, they do. I think you've heard of oil wells that run dry. You've heard in Botswana diamonds that were big or whatever the size is, and today they struggle to find as many. The bellies of Johannesburg are running out of gold. So that's the reality. The implication is that from a perspective, you need to ask ourselves, how are we using these particular resources today? But then, how do our children, and those that come after them will be able to do certain things? Technology has helped. Sometimes we hear that gold dust means what do you call them? These mountains that have been put on mine dams, yes, are now being recycled for certain things to be gotten out of it, but that does not give us exactly the same quantities as would be the case. So I think these are critical questions for engaging. But I think from the environmental perspective, it's also to see those, however beautiful they may look, or I feel them. It's not what nature meant to be. And I'm not saying that we truly use our minerals, but it's also, are they benefiting us, the people, the owners of the land? I think someone talked about that in, was it or someone else? Or her? Or is it just benefiting capital at the expense and leaving our young men and women dying in the high seas as they try to cross, putting themselves in the ships now, as opposed to when they were being quote unquote hunted by the empire, of course, in collaboration with some of our leaders at the same time. So I think we need to bear in mind that we need to be conscious in terms of making decisions about utilization today, but also bearing in mind that things will be required.
Right. Let's take that question to sir.
Oh, thank you, sir. As we celebrate the birthday of the AU Day, Africa Day, but we see them mostly, they are missing in action in Africa in terms where there's conflict, like we see in the Congo, Nigeria, seems not to be seen in action. One may say, yeah, just a toothless dog. Is that a fair question, a fair assessment of the AU we have presently? Thank you.
All right. I remember Mr. Hendricks is still in the room. Ask him, is the AU still, is she gone? All right, I was really going to ask it. Not here. All right, I was going to ask that simple question. Is the AU still, as an institution of purpose. I think I will find someone to respond to. All right, there we go. The last question.
All right, thank you very much. I'm not putting this to any specific speaker, but general. But most importantly, if they can be Satuli and probably Professor Moyo and Professor Mugwe. This is just a general question. Of course, this is a very important day for Africa. While that is the case, of course, it is a day meant for us to reflect and also to chart the way forward. But my question is, how many countries are celebrating this day? My quick statistic gives to me probably 10 countries. So how do we move this unity to practical cooperation, which is felt by all Africans? The second quick question is, I'm not going to detail it, but just how can we amplify African voices in global institutions? And lastly, how can we rebrand African image? African global image. Thank you.
Thank you. Your last questions could start another whole meeting. And if you are trying to Professor Chulima Tunsela you've been asked as a respondent on these questions, how Africa can rebrand itself. I think is what is also being asked here. If you are there, please do respond to the last question, and then Professor Mati, you will respond to the earlier question of the relevance of AU and or its effectiveness as perceived by, and I'm sure they still have, so the relevance and their success is as perceived by people in general.
Right. Thank you, colleagues, for those questions, and thank you to Professor Moyo for reminding us about past successes being not a predictor of now. How do we rebrand Africa? Number one, we shouldn't be the first to only talk about what's wrong in our country. I attend conferences overseas, and I know that the African who talks only about African pathologies gets the loudest cheer. And I don't think we should hide our pathologies. In my whole presentation was that we should not define ourselves by our weaknesses only. I think it is Khalil Gibran who writes in The Prophet that we tend to see ourselves in terms of our weakest link, but we are also as strong as our strongest link. Just as the mighty sea cannot be judged by the frailty of its form, it's judged by the totality of what it is. So as Africans, it just starts with that. Well, how do we talk about Africa? We should talk about Africa in a holistic way that also looks at its past. I would do it the sandwiched way, actually. I would talk about what's good about Africa, what's bad about Africa, and end with what's good about Africa. We need to write about it, but we also need to teach about it. The fact that you only get these stories about the Stephen Wamu quarters in old newspapers means we're not talking enough about what's happening in this country. And so, in this continent. So let's write about it. Let's make sure that if there are newspapers that unfairly characterize Africa as a cesspool, we fight back. But lastly, let's make sure that we do the right thing ourselves. We're not part of the problem. We're not corrupt. We're not incompetent. We don't take what doesn't belong to us. We just do the right thing. So that also on its own, how we present ourselves to the world will start shifting how people view Africa and therefore regenerate the brand. But lastly, from this event, somebody said, what next? Let's start this process of storytelling about Africa. This is where I agree with Dr. Moyo that how we talk about the past should not be pretentious. Where I slightly differ from him is that I think we should talk about the past as a model of what we can be. Thank you.
Prof, thank you so much appreciated. I took one segment of the question, mindful of time. Prof. Martin, you have that question that asks, we are celebrating the AU. The question is, are they effective?
How long do I have? Those that are African history or African affairs, opposition leaders in 2 Eastern African countries are currently undergoing through some form of, some say it's they're being called to account for disturbing peace and unity in their own countries. I'm talking about Tanzania currently. In the Ugandan case, the Besigye is the husband of a very prominent senior UN official. African human rights defenders have been flocking to Kampala to try and be in solidarity with Besigye to support this particular cause. These are the bad things and the words about Africa's governance. Early this week, so many Africans were deported, detained, very senior people, some ex-chief justices of different countries, some ex-justice and constitutional affairs ministers being sent back. And I think this speaks to the urgency of solidarity. But at the same time, we know that there is another form of solidarity which is existing between our leaders, because Besigye was he was arrested, or whatever the name is, in Nairobi, and extradited extrajudicially to Uganda. Okay, East Africa has a common or a free movement of people project. We don't know exactly what this entails when people go to be in solidarity with others or not. But the paralysis of the solidarity, probably from the perspective of the people at the bottom, is because our leaders are probably the ones that have greater solidarity than us. We may hate each other because of the passports that we carry, but our leaders know when to reinforce each other's privileges. So unless we try to make sense of that, then we'll continue having discussions. Is it relevant? If you ask me, yes, and we need to make it work for common people of the African people as opposed to. Thank you.
Pleasure. I will give Bongiwe and Catherine closing remarks. I think the other people have got a chance to give a couple of questions. So if I can, let me do that. Bongiwe, just a final closing remarks, and I'll give Dr. Mokwe to conclude, because I am out of time and the organizers are looking at me like someone who charges per hour. So let's keep so that you get your conversation. I don't want to look like I'm judging per hour.
Yeah, I mean, so in closing, I want to reflect on something that might seem quite frivolous, but maybe it's something we ought to engage with. So when I received the invitation for today, we were asked to dress in African attire. And this is often the call on days like these ones, and perhaps on Heritage Day. And in between, whose clothes are we wearing? Whose identity are we carrying? And why have we made our Africanness a celebration as opposed to a way of living and a way of life? And when we walk into our shops, how many of those shops reflect who we are as Africans, you know? So I think, I mean, I am standing between us and food, right? And I hope that the food is also going to be African. Yeah, I think the point I'm trying to make is we've made our Africanness foreign to how we live. It's almost like it's visited. We visit our Africanness, and I think we need to start engaging with that if we truly want our children, especially, to embrace being African.
All right, there we go. Provocation. Well done on the African attires that you all came in.
I'm here on behalf of APN, and the lady at APN reminded me.
Yeah.
But this morning, I also got a call from my PN. She said to me, "Are you dressed?" You know, and I mean, luckily she's female, because it would have been a She wanted to remind me to dress appropriately for the occasion. You see what I'm talking about?
That subject matter in itself is quite a lot of what we call our African way, depending on whether it's Africa. It's actually questionable whether it's ours. The history of some of the things that we think are our own African way, we will skip here. All right, let's Catherine, let's give the closing remarks to you. I know that and perhaps you've been a chance to contribute. Let's just give you in 1 minute, please, your closing remarks, and then Dr. Mokwe will conclude. And then from there, I will bring Mwanje Nganjo to come and do our conclusions and our vote of thanks.
Thank you very much, Chairperson and fellow panelists and participants, for such a robust conversation. I think that point that has been made just preceding this one is very critical. And I'm one of the people that has always advocated for the right to adequate food, asking the government of Australia, for example, why some African food cannot be allowed into the country when there are Africans living there. So I think today we have made very critical points that actually re-emphasize the idea that there is a nexus between justice and reparation, and there is another nexus between justice and development, and the fact that reparation is both a claim and an obligation upon ourselves and a demand from others. So the two are mutually reinforcing. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you so much, Catherine. Much appreciated. Being short and precise. Dr. Mowbray, final remarks?
Try and be short. There were some questions which were asked, and I wanted to just speak to that really briefly. How do we talk about Africa? Recently, you may know that Botswana changed its government. After 58 years of the same party, we have a new party in power, or parties. It's a coalition. I was approached by a Western diplomat who said, well, I think your president should really be congratulated on conceding defeat. And I said, please don't congratulate him. Are we sending letters of congratulation to Rishi Sunak when he concedes defeat because Keir Starmer has won? Because the subtext is it was not expected. It was about Africa. And I do get a bit upset when I see fellow Africans happily getting these congratulations and being so happy that we're being praised for behaving normally. The second thing really is, and that was speaking to what Mayor Madonsela was talking about, not focusing on our own weaknesses, but really focusing on our strengths. The other comment made was, it was so peaceful. Botswana was so peaceful. They should also be congratulated for that. But we're generally known to be peaceful people. Yeah. We do not have war heroes, struggle heroes. And it was quite normal. One day was very much like the next day. And yet we were so supposed to feel really special. And at times people thought perhaps I was being a bit otherwise. In terms of how do we talk about Africa, I think the intergenerational conversations are incredibly important, where Indigenous knowledge transfer can happen. A long time ago, so I've been told, I was not there then, but when extended families were sitting together around the fire after meals, there were stories which were told. Indigenous knowledge was shared without people saying it's now time to share Indigenous knowledge. It happened. It was so it was a way of life. Going back to what Mes said about also the dress, I think we should be thinking even beyond whether we're wearing African clothes. Our values should be internalized, regardless of even if you're wearing Chinese outfits. If you are African and you are committed to our African values, they should be visible in how you engage, how you talk to people. I was in London for 20 months on sabbatical, and I talked to people on the street. My daughter was a bit worried. Mama, we're not in Botswana. I'd say, no, but, I cannot help it. I see a person, connect, and I greet. And I must admit, I was targeting Black people I saw there. And I'd say hello, and I'd say, where are you from? The first answer might be, well, I'm from London. Now, the thing is, if I'd been white and I'd asked the same question, it might have been a bit racist in terms of wanting to say you're not from here when you're going back home, because that's part of the And so once they said London, I said, no, I mean, where are your ancestors from? And they'd open up and say they were from Ghana, and we'd have a discussion, and I'd ask if they were happy there, and they would say, no, they're not. But the external appearance is always, as we're talking about our young people wanting to go overseas. And finally, in terms of solidarity, what is it we can learn from the amazing solidarity we're seeing, South-South solidarity, but also from the North in relation to Palestine? What is it? What has it triggered? Where you're finding people in London marching almost every weekend. We had our own Palestine march last Saturday. There are marches happening all over the world. What is it we can learn from that? And I'd just like to close with that and then thank you each and every one of you. And I apologize for constantly giving you my back.
Thank you so much. Conversation. In conclusion, to invite from IJR Mwanja Ganjo to come and do the conclusion and vote of thanks. And then after that, Jane of you will stand up and you will rush to the food. Yes, you continue to settle for now. No, I need to be there fast. No, to comment. Yes.
Thank you very much. The event today has been a reminder that Africa Day is not just a celebration, but a call to action. I think that's the key takeaway for me, and I hope it is for everybody else. And just to recap a little bit, we were reminded by Prof. Mills Sokol that the theme for this year is actually couched also in the context of the G20 Summit that is being hosted in as well. And Dr. Moyo, as usual, it was like sitting by the fireside. It's always a pleasure to hear from you, but he also said that young African people don't know our history. If they don't know our history and what formed our institutions, how then can we carry our agenda forward for transformation? And we're actually failing them and not deliberately educating them about our history and the history of our institutions. And Prof. Madosela, what I take away from her is that there's a lot that she's saying, but one of them is that the fruits of our collective labor are not always shared equally. And it's always the same tactic that the enemy always uses, divide and conquer. So let's continue to be unified even as we celebrate who we are as Africans and be aware that the enemy will come for us one by one and convince us that what we're doing is right. Give praises to one person. And Dr. Alice, you pointed out that our African normative values should always be our starting point. And I think that came out throughout this afternoon. Prof. Cheryl Hendricks, my boss, actually pointed out that as Africans, yes, we can talk, there's a lot of rhetoric, but also what are the actual mechanisms that we're putting in place in order to 60 years plus after independence, we haven't moved very much the needle on reparations. And yes, we might not be liked for that, but really this redress the injustices of the past in order for us to build bridges for the future. And from Dr. Catherine, I take away the nugget that I take away is that yes, let's not just wait for people on the continent, but also people in the diaspora. Anybody who's of African descent, indulged in the injustice. And Kamala, yes, we really missed you, Kamala. I don't know if you're still online, but it's always a pleasure when you join us in person. And you remind us that we better going forward if we leave our youth behind. And that's not always, but also like Prof. Moyo likes to point out, but what are those underlying causes that cause our youth to want to leave the continent in pursuit of a better life out there? That's not going to be enjoyable or better in all instances. Yeah. And Prof. Mati spoke on indigenous knowledge, but also living today sustainably, knowing that we can celebrate our past, enjoy our present sustainably, and also build bridges for the future. Ladies and gentlemen, without taking too much of your time, I would like to acknowledge the partners that made possible today. The Mandela Institute for Development Studies, Southern Africa Youth Forum, the Institute for Justice and Reconciliation, African Philanthropy Network, and of course, our host here, CAPSI, and the Business School. Thank you very much. And here's a big hand to all our speakers, Dr. Kusana Moyo, Professor Tuli Madonsela, Dr. Alice Mokwe, Professor Cheryl Hendricks, Dr. Catherine Namakula, Bongo Ndondo, Professor Jacob Mati, Kamala Dixon, and over and above that, our entertainer who's got a song for us before we go and eat, right? Just 1 minute. You're really going to advertise at the beginning. A little bit, and over and above all, thank you for IT support, sound, all our participants, those that joined us online as well. And Lawrence, we forgot to ask if there are questions online, but I think there's a chance and try and look at them and see what we can do. And to all our participants who joined us in person, thank you very much. And also a big hand to our MC, Lawrence Dube.
Jacob, you can do quality control. I think we have some our session. I think the one thing I can give you a feedback is that perhaps in this video a day. And I think there is so many substances and so many things that some people have an interest in, to probably interrogate. When I saw that the keynote speakers had been put in 10 to 15 minutes, I said I've never heard of a keynote for 10 to 15 minutes. For just let them go a little longer. It's nearly impossible to put constructive thoughts that everyone can discuss on in 10 minutes. So I think that is the great feedback that we can give to organizers. We may perhaps need a little bit more time the next time that we are here. Can we still have an appetite for the food or for me? Otherwise, I will be at liberty to. Otherwise, we are good to go. You look really cold. I'm not sure it's cold feet though. Yes. So after that, we'll proceed outside. We have some snacks and let's talk. Let's further engage on some of these subject matters. But let's exchange names also. More importantly.
Oh, you sent it by WhatsApp. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you so much. The one for closing is the love song. Song. I'm gonna make it mine today. Thank you.
Bazali bam, ndibizelenu nomvula Bazali bam,
We very much appreciate it. For anyone who doesn't understand the language, and I know she was simply saying she's looking for the love of her life, so let's meet. So let's meet outside, let's do a chat. So one final reason we can I ask you just found right in this section here.
Just stand in front of the chair.
Something.